Hi. Boop 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 boop. Welcome to Escaping Dystopia. My name is Roy. I'll be your host for this evening. And every time we ever do the show. You might notice a little bit more freeform this evening. I decided to go ahead and stand up for this. Got a new desk and stuff, and so we've upgraded the studio, aka Roy's basement, to something a little bit more fun. Let me go through real quick some of the stuff we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. We've got an update for those of you who've been under that proverbial rock. They've actually made an arrest. The Walking Dead. Now these are what the people back home. Yeah, that's right. Hi, how's it going? The Russia investigation has officially caused. Sorry, I love playing with those things. It's claimed its first victim. And so we'll talk about that. There was an attack in New York City, bus attack by a guy who wants to play ISIS. I'll talk a little bit about that. There was an attack here locally in Thornton, Colorado. We're going to talk a little bit about that and the connection between those two attacks. We're going to talk a little bit about how our president has responded, because now we've seen two different types of major terror attacks here in the U.S. The attack in Las Vegas, and then what we saw in New York, and the response was quite a bit different. This, of course, plays into the theme we've been talking about for some time here, regarding the status of our president. I'm going to talk a little bit maybe about the groupthink trap tonight. I've seen this happen. There's actually a couple news stories about today. This goes into a little bit about the social network issue they're talking about in Congress today with some of the international issues that are coming up. The tax cuts finally got released today. No surprises there on any part, so we'll talk about that. And then we'll finish up and start the real show here with a shout out to the H-Town Astros. Watching the World Series was a lot of fun this year. Those last few games that I caught. I'm not a huge baseball fan, to be honest, but those were fun games. That was some good baseball. So, with that, without any further ado, we'll start this week's chronicle of the shit you needed to pay attention to. Just kidding. It's kind of fun trying to pick up stuff for this, right? So I kind of think of the show a little bit, for me, as kind of this archive material, right? Of course, there's that hoping to get somebody to notice, pay attention to all this boring politics stuff, but also just that chronicle of stuff that happened. So this week, I got my birthday present, which was the first arrest being revealed for the investigation. Trump campaign manager, campaign CEO, was arrested for money laundering and lying about a bunch of stuff. This is really the tip of the iceberg. The thing that was fun about this was this whole guy, Papadopoulos, which came out. So what's fun about this is the fact that he's already pled guilty. There's not like a question of whether anybody will plead guilty or if there will be anything. He has already pled guilty. He has admitted to breaking the law. And now we also find out that there's a good chance he's been wearing a wire for the last little while. The kind of fallout continues is that Sam Clovis, that guy that was nominated, the Trump supporter for the USDA position, has withdrawn his nomination because he was the one, I believe, who was overseeing Papadopoulos and would have direct knowledge of this. It looks apparent that Jeff Sessions is also going to get tied into this. There's some reports that he rejected specifically that meeting between Russia and Trump, which would mean that he kind of knew about that somebody was setting it up, which he has testified in Congress that he did not know anything. And how could you possibly, try to besmirch my reputation by claiming I knew something about the Trump, what was it, Russia? Was it right? What was it? Yeah, so anyway, that guy got already admitted to breaking the law. So there's going to be more coming on that, which will always be fun. we saw it today, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in the groupthink, an international issue. But today we saw a little bit from the congressional testimony. I'm going to have to look into this more because it just happened. I talked about it. I thought it was happening earlier, but anyway, I have to get some summaries on that. But there's a big issue in technology firms and in technology as a kind of culture that doesn't really look at the effects of that technology, right? The idea of just disrupting and changing things is the point. So there's not really that, oh, well, people will use this to bully and do all these other things and influence this or do that, and people will use it to steal people's identity and steal, and security was, in early computer science kind of an afterthought. There's actually a couple of big arguments about that concept, but the way we use our technology and the way we've tied everyone together and the way these technology companies continue to expand and the power that they have is a real thing. We're starting to see a little bit more, and we need to talk about it a little bit more. We're coming close to, for what has been like for 20 years coming, this thing called the singularity, where the AIs and stuff will really start to be extremely disruptive. This comes as part of this Russia investigation because now we're starting to see how these things happen. There wasn't as much the bots that are part of that now, but I think they are a big part of this discussion. There was actually an analysis I saw the other day that roughly like a third of the president's followers on Twitter are not real accounts. And apparently he has retweeted at least one of their sycophantic tweets. Anyway, so that continues. So we've actually seen now, this whole moving on from them claiming nothing, nobody, anybody, who you talking about what, to somebody actually being arrested and apparently wearing a wire. So we're going to see a little bit more coming on that. From all angles, it looks like Mueller's pretty much a hard ass. So here comes that ass kicking. So there was an attack in New York City on Halloween evening. Young man who had fallen under the sway of ISIS decided to try and initiate some sort of attack. The thing that's interesting, or there's a lot of horrible things about this. Apparently 8 people were killed. He tried to do this. I got the quote from one of the stories. After the collision, he ran into a school bus, which stopped, and the driver exited the truck with a pellet gun and a paintball gun. That kind of just tells you the caliber, and I hate to use that word, of the people that we're dealing with, and it's when you compare this to some of the other things that we're dealing with, it just really fades in comparison, and to have it be such an overwhelming focus for the government is a little bit dangerous, right? The president went on a ridiculous tweet storm about this, including calling for the death penalty, trying to set the guy to Gitmo, just a complete making a farce of the concept of justice, while doing so actually calling out the U.S. system of justice as bullshit, as he did today. And then he has this tweet: "We must not allow ISIS to return or enter our country after defeating them in the Middle East and elsewhere. Enough!" But this guy, in particular, was radicalized here in the U.S. So he didn't, come over from anywhere. And he wasn't like this when he got here. So these kind of solutions of blocking people from coming to the country and trying to do that kind of stuff and trying to squeeze harder is not anywhere near the solution to even this particular problem, even this one that he's gonna try and use to say, "Oh, I was right about everything," but you weren't. And this is roughly a seventh of what happened in Las Vegas. There was an attack here in Thornton, Colorado, and calling it an attack, I think, is the only way to do it. A guy shows up at a Walmart with a gun and opens fire and just starts shooting people. And he killed 3 people today here. And now This is not, it's not going to even get national attention because this kind of stuff happens so much in this country. But I think it's just horrid. The leadership on here is so bad to try and take this one attack in New York, ignore all these others that happen all around the country constantly, and claim that somehow this is what the important thing is. How the president responded to this is just so revealing of what we're dealing with here. I mean, when there was, again, the Nazis run down a guy in Charlottesville, these are fine people. It's just, we got to get some more information. But this guy runs down something. He finds out he's a Muslim. He's calling for the death penalty within minutes. That's not a rational response, really. That's a prejudged, already know what you're planning on doing, just justifying it kind of stance. You got 500 people were shot in Las Vegas. 500! That number, just count 500 people being shot. And that was, we need more info. We can't, politicize this. We can't do anything. And then you have what was a really, not even a horrible car accident. We've had car accidents that were worse. And I don't want to downplay it because it's a horrible situation. But again, 5 of the 8 people were visiting this country on vacation from Argentina. And then to turn that into now we have to ban immigrants from coming to this country, there's only one reason that you're trying to do this. And he has a very ulterior motive, which we've talked about before. And this is part of Bannon's ethno-nationalism, where you have to divide people by their religions. And they're very much, this is why a lot of the evangelicals so love him, because everything they do, including what Pence does, is very Christian. And that's the only religion that they really, really want to respect, ultimately. Because they say Judeo-Christian, but, you Jews, you got your own country, right? Okay. So, there's really some scary stuff that happens on this stuff. And you've seen it now. It's so blatantly real. Just 500 people shot in Vegas. And no calls for anything. And then you have a bad accident, which I'm being facetious there on purpose. This was an attack meant to be as deadly as possible, and it's barely a blip on the radar when compared to what happens every day in this country with guns. New Jersey, and I'm curious as we see, and we'll see if we follow up this before something else happens, but I'm curious to see if this guy was denied trying to buy guns in New Jersey or New York. Paintball gun and a pellet gun. And that's what he's scared of. That to me blows it away. And that his reaction is so different it's complete and utter horseshit. Sorry. And it sucks that I have to say that about the President of the United States, but that's where we at. So I was going to talk a little bit about the groupthink trap. I've noticed this before, and this is kind of a little bit more intellectual part of the fun discussion. But I've been online and part of online communities for a long time, over more than half my life. Because I was, a big nerd back in high school. I was online, I had BBS. Did that all the way through college, too, and beyond. And I've seen what happens. And there was a place, I'll give you a quick example, a place called slashdot.org, which was named that. It was an early website, one of the early kind of group websites. And it was named that, it's slashdot.org, but it was named that because it's pretty much impossible to say the actual address. Oh, it's http:///dot.org. Anyway, so that was like this geek website for a lot of open source software was the big draw, and the evangelical side, and what drew that community together. And so what happens is you spend more time, and it happened to me while I was in there. Your opinion on certain things begins to morph to that of the community, and as the community develops, it starts to build its own. It's just culture growing up, and this is just the way humans as social beings happen. But to get the attention to stand out, you have to be more and more of whatever that thing is that you're doing, right? In that case, more pure, on the open source side, or more, against Microsoft and the system, and more, just every kind of idea and theme that a culture happens. And you saw it again, with a lot of the websites and the, I call the Bernie Bros. And you see that in a lot of political groups. It happens very, very quickly. That's why I stopped going to Daily Kos, because there's just things within the community that become verboten outside of the community, and there are certain things that are good or bad, and they're very much defined, and they become more radicalized because you take the same like-minded people and put them in the same place where they have others that confirm what they're believing. And that reinforces beliefs and builds on them, so you go further and further. It's very, 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 very similar to the way religions function. Certainly the one that I was a part of growing up, where that was a big part of the group think, where you build the faith together, you come together in a group and share what you believe, and the outside world, well, they're all just wrong, but we all know here in this group. And those groups, the group think online becomes as real as the real world, because our consciousness is devoted to, reading and being a part of that idea and that concept. We're all devouring the same information, right? I meant this in this point in other contexts, but we have largely the same brains as human beings. And given the same information, being in the same place, you tend to see the same stuff and hear the same things and draw the same conclusions about the reality that you experience. Because we're such a wildly technological species now and have access to so much different sources of information, that kind of groupthink happens because you're all processing the same information about this outside world that you don't actually see, hear, taste, or touch, but just read about or just see video about. Excuse me. So you're all processing that same stuff. You're all deciding what is good and bad about each thing that comes in and building those layers of your culture, of your group. There's downsides to this. Because what it does generally is radicalizes people. Just by its natural, smaller group wanting more attention within that group, you more radically do what that group wants to see. And you get approval for it. And that approval is real. It'll be interesting to see the neuropsychological stuff on a lot of this stuff. But our interactions and you are real people out there. And it's just a little click on a button, but, that interaction is real. It's a real thing. And it does lead to real-world behaviors that can be not positive. One of the things what the introduction of the Russian troll aspect of these groups adds is that radicalization part. Because it doesn't take that much to get a group of people to start to push a little bit more. And when you have somebody who's doing that actively as their kind of point, just egging others on, allowing for more radical ideas to be introduced that some people might think that they're not sure that everybody else thinks, but maybe, and then somebody else throws it out there. And maybe even, argues for it, but they continue to do this kind of stuff. So if you have even just, I don't know if you've ever been in the bad apple concept. This is something we're all familiar with, that if you have a group of, pretty neutral folks and then get somebody in there who's like, hey, let's go knock off this thing. I know a place where we can go get into some trouble, the bad apple. Hey, screw those Democrats. You guys like Bernie, don't you? Screw those, all this kind of stuff was exactly what was going on and being played into this directly from an organized, very intelligent government aspect. This is, an attack on our democracy by a well-funded foreign government who is doing this smartly. So this is how that groupthink becomes even more dangerous, because it can become infiltrated and controlled. So be wary of it. I tend to be a little bit hard on the contrary side to understate things a tad bit. my contrariness is part of a defense against this, and I think that's something that you have to be aware of. Because I've seen, even in my group, as we've kind of bifurcated politically on Facebook, the desire to be more radical, to appeal to more radical, that more pure, constant quest for purity, which is an impossible quest. So do not embark on it once you feel yourself comfortably yourself. But anyway, I'm going to move on real quick because I could go on about that for a wall. What time is it? How are we doing? All right. The tax cuts. They finally pulled out their tax cuts. There's no surprises here. They talked about all this. They talked about doing the mortgage interest deduction, capping that, which that came out, so the realtors are against it. They're basically trying to do this where they've got 50 votes in the Senate. That's what the tax claim was written about. They think they've got them, so we'll see how it goes. It's going to be, all the pressure is going to be on those few Republicans who can actually think. But this is a Republican pure thing. If they don't get tax cuts, they don't get them, so they're going to try and rewrite the tax laws. And they're probably going to work. We ran a $400 billion deficit this last year. By the way, the yearly deficit is the difference between revenue and spending. The debt is the accumulated deficit. But people get all confused about that shit. But we're running a $400 billion deficit already. They are setting up these tax cuts so they can increase the deficit by exactly the most amount they could without having to pass it with 60 votes. So this is part of a budget reconciliation thing. There are laws in place that say if you go over by so much, then you can't do it this way. So they're right at that line. That's what that whole $1.5 trillion is that they get to spend. They get to add that much to the deficit for these tax cuts. As we've seen very clearly, this is all, this is one of the biggest transfers that we've seen. It's direct and blatant from the middle class and working people and the services that the government provides to the wealthy. It's going to be rough because I think it's going to pass. And then we're going to go all Kansas style for the next couple of years. Again, this is part of the chaos that's going to be created. Try to be created before the next election cycle. So, get ready, kiddos. If the tax cuts don't pass, which will be interesting, you're going to see probably a massive sell-off on Wall Street for a number of reasons, because it will, A, have proven that the Republicans cannot simply govern, period, and they're going to lose in 2018 huge. It also means that what they've kind of tried to factor in for, right, because they've been assured by all these people that these tax cuts would pass. So that's part of the big run-up on Wall Street. So if they fail, you're going to see a massive crash, then a bunch of things happen. So there's a ridiculous amount of pressure on them to get these things to pass. So they're going to try. And I think I think it's really close. It's one of those things where... excellent. I think, it's going to be close, right? So... because they've only got the 52 votes, so they can only lose a couple. We'll see if Flake or McCain... Corker's not going to vote against it. Flake's not going to go to vote against it. They're both looking at very nice, cushy jobs outside of government service, so they don't want to go after this. This is something that a lot of business folks have been having. This is a massive, massive tax cut for the Trump family. Which is one of the biggest lies he's going to keep telling about this. Oh, this is not for me. It's not. Literally, you're one of... I think the Trump International Organization was one of the top 50 private organizations that will be affected directly by the pass-through. So that cuts their tax rate by at least, I think, 10%. We'd know if we saw the tax returns. But not going to happen. Ever, at least from a legal standpoint or a voluntary standpoint. He lied about it. He's a liar. It's kind of one of those things when, after the point, people are like, is he ever gonna... There's no comeuppance here, even after... And this is going to be one of the interesting parts when they start to cart away, person after person for crime after crime. What's he gonna do then, and how bad is that gonna get? If it happens too soon, there's some weird calculations that I'm thinking about on that. Remember, the Republicans didn't turn on Nixon until there was an election coming up a few months away, and Nixon was a chain around their necks. And the Republicans now will not turn on Trump, not en masse, until there's an election coming up. So don't expect any impeachments to happen from a Republican-controlled Congress until it comes to be next summer, and Trump's polling about 20%. That's really... You got to remember that impeachment is a political thing. There's no, oh, he broke the law, so we impeach him. No, that's not how our laws work in this country. And ultimately, they're enforced by this guy. So, we're in a little bit of uncharted territory already, but we've moved really closer to some very uncharted territory. And he's not showing any signs of having the humility to respect the rule of law in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, not until at least 2018. I don't think. So we'll see if that's going to happen. So, and the only other way is if the people, like has happened in other countries, just rise up and go and basically camp out in D.C. until he leaves. That's what's worked in a number of places, but I think we're a while from that, but I don't know. Again, the longer this goes on, the more normal it seems to everyone, so that's not good at all. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and bid you adieu. One more. Congrats to the Houston Astros.